She's pretty much a badass. So everybody give it up for Zoe Quinn.
Hi, so I'm Zoe Quinn, and I'm here actually to talk about weird DIY cybernetics. So there's a lot of really cool advancements being made in medical technology in terms of like robotic replacements for missing limbs and other things to help people like that. But clearly I am not a medical doctor, so I'm more here to talk about a completely different element about it that you might not be aware of. DIY cyborgs, or DIY borgs if you like terrible dad jokes like I do. Sometimes we're referred to as grinders, sometimes we're referred to as biohackers, but it's all the same. It's a variety of people who are sort of doing lower budget, widely accessible wetware for the masses. So who exactly does weird stuff like this? The answer is kind of like a cool variety of people to give you sort of more of an idea about what this sort of movement is about. Hackers is a big thing for it. So people like Tim Cannon, who's pictured here, made a device called the Circadia, which records data from his body and uploads it to any sort of Android phone. He put this in himself about a year or two ago as a beta testing. They're working on furthering the development from this, but he's part of this open source wetware group called Grindhouse that is working on a lot of interesting projects like this. And it's not just the open source community that sort of embraced this wholeheartedly. Another group is artists. So cool niche things like Neil Harbison, pictured here. He's a colorblind artist who made this device called the cyborg, which is on his head. This allows people to perceive color through sound waves. His partner, who co-founded the Cyborg Institute with him, is Moon Ribas, who created a online seismic sensor that actually attaches to her elbow and lets her feel little vibrations anytime that there's an earthquake around the world. So people who are making these sort of one-off, really interesting changes to their bodies for artistic purposes. Then there's body modification artists like Steve Hayworth, who's actually Guinness World Book of Records most advanced body mod professional from 1999 to current. People like him sort of help implement these actually really interesting devices made by the artists and hackers. And it's sort of this big group community effort. Body mod's been a very big part of this movement in a way that you might not realize. People have been modifying their bodies as long as people have had bodies to modify. And it's really cool to see the sort of intersection of art, tech, and open source movement kind of collide to form this really interesting movement. And aside from these really incredible and inspiring thought leaders, we also have doofuses like me who are kind of taking these really interesting things that people create and sort of implementing it and sort of pushing the little boundaries to see how we can make these things manifest. So I'm in sort of a weird position where I'm not just a woman in tech, I'm tech and a woman. And I figure, and although the motivations for biohackers can vary across many lines, some people call themselves cyborgs jokingly, some people take it very seriously, like Neil Harbison trying to get officially recognized on his passport as a cyborg and starting his institute. I personally am a part of this movement because I think it's super important that while we have so many of the shitty parts of the cyberpunk future, like our government has made robots that can kill people on the other side of the planet, we deserve to have this silly stuff like cool Deus Ex like mutations and stuff. So I want to talk a bit about the procedures I've had done because that's really more the interesting part because I can actually show you some stuff. The first thing I have is a magnetic implant in my left ring finger. It's a neodymium magnet plated with gold and encased in silicon. And I'm not going to describe the process of getting in there to you because it's gross. But it's been phenomenally interesting since I've had it. People might ask, why would you do that? Well, aside from being able to flirt with cute people by making really bad attraction jokes and do cool bar tricks like spitting Canadian currency because Canadian currency is magnetic, American currency isn't, and weird stuff you learn when you have this. The real appeal to this is that you actually get to touch electromagnetic fields, which when you're a game developer or an electrical engineer or someone working with electronics can be such a difference. So you can feel the difference between a live wire and a dead one by the electromagnetic field around it. The first time I actually was able to, after the healing process, feel the magnet in my finger was when I was using an old laptop, and I started to feel this weird sensation, like I was, like as if you were gripping a kegger cup and you felt the little bubbles of carbonation against your finger. It turned out what I was feeling was the electromagnetic field around my hard drive. A year later, I was using that same hard drive because I had upgraded to a different computer, and I wanted to, and I had to send it in for repairs, so I was using the old one, and I booted it up, and the magnetic field felt different. I did a hard disk check. Sure enough, it was failing. I was feeling the weird erraticness of its magnetic field and was able to tell ahead of time that it was failing. Subsequently, I became too depressed to keep using the laptop because it's sort of this weird kinship that you end up with machines like that, where it's like feeling a thing die on you, and that's like profoundly depressing. It's also really great for tiny screws when you're working on those laptops to replace the dead thing, because those things suck. So a lot of people tend to have a lot of questions about this, like, do you mess up credit cards? No. I've tried not to, and it hasn't happened yet. You can mess up hotel key cards, which is especially good for bothering your friends at conferences. I'll see you later. You don't have to worry too much about MRIs. About 11,000 people or so, as of my last checking, have this magnetic implant, and they've been able to have MRIs no problem. There's been no reported cases of it ripping out. Some people have said it feels a little bit weird, but not too bad. But we've been giving MRIs to veterans who have shrapnel in them for years. We're pretty well equipped to deal with this. My next goal is to see if I can totally mess up an Etch-a-Sketch. So fingers crossed on that. So essentially what this does is it turns you into a shitty version of Magneto. So that's the magnetic implant. The other thing I have is the NFC chip implant, which is made by, I think they're either here or in Seattle, a place called Dangerous Things. It's reprogrammable NFC that has 888 bytes of writable data. So I can take my phone, because I use Android. iPhone's still like, nothing but Apple Pay. We want our own proprietary things, because they're no fun. But you basically just tap it against your hand, and you're able to sort of do your own thing there. This can have a variety of applications. I'm still sort of messing around with it, but I do things that are sometimes useful for security, like backing up my passwords into my hand, using it for two-factor authentication, reprogramming it to be my business cards at conferences. So instead of handing out cards, you can just go, give me your phone. Oh, hey, look, you texted me, go away. I think it's also very important for people doing this work to also have kind of fun with it, because it's not just, because again, so much cyberpunk stuff is all dystopic and depressing. So I like to do things with it as well, like program it to send people stupid texts. I've programmed it to play that sound effect from The Price is Right when you lose, which is really great if you tell a lot of terrible puns, like clearly I do. And also the first thing I ever did with it was I put a distribution code for Deus Ex in it. Because why not have fun with this stuff, right? But there's people who are doing more than just having fun and adding functionality to the body. There's like a lot of interesting work that is happening in these open source software spaces that is also being translated to other more useful spaces, like the We Are Not Waiting hashtag and the Open APS project. The Open APS project is an open and transparent effort to make safe and effective basic artificial pancreas system, the APS in that acronym, widely available to more quickly improve and save as many lives as possible and reduce the burden of type 1 diabetes. This patient-led project seeks to bypass the red tape nightmare that keeps data about patients' own bodies away from them and locked in the company's proprietary software. By open sourcing this technology, patients can more accurately get the information from their insulin pumps, share their data with others, and rapidly create new tools that work with their body's highly specific needs. This can lead to open source medical devices that can be rapidly improved on by any engineer who cares enough to spend their time to the project, resulting in lower costs, quicker development, and wider availability of life-saving technology. And this is a project that's been ongoing for quite some time. You can read all about it at OpenAPS. If you are at all interested in open source software, or if you are a sufferer of diabetes, highly recommend checking it out, maybe helping them out if you can. In terms of the less serious stuff, my next thing is to go with Grindhouse Wetware, the people I mentioned earlier, the creators of the Circadia implant. And I'm currently slated to be one of the first testers of their next implant, the North Star. What the eventual model of this will do is it's like a glowing bioluminescent star embedded in the back of the hand that will point in the direction of magnetic north. I have no idea what this is going to do to me. They've obviously tested a lot of things to make sure that it's safe, like basic electrical engineering stuff, battery safety, things like that, but it's still an experimental territory, and it's one that I find quite exciting. I have no idea what will happen. I think it's pretty cool. It's sort of been a dream to be able to help push things like this forward, because again, I have a lot of optimism that if things stay low cost, open source, and freely available to the public, that we can get a lot of really interesting stuff done instead of having cybernetics and this taste of the future be reserved solely for people with money. The cost of these implants, my magnet, less than $100. My chip, less than $100. It's such a big barrier for people to only have access to cool technology like this, or even medical stuff like with the Open APS project. So I think this sort of movement is actually a lot more important and a lot less ridiculous than it seems, though we shouldn't forget to have fun too. I am Zoe Quinn, and thank you. Oh, and I forgot to do a cool trick with my magnet.
So I think at this point, we are open to some questions from the audience, although I have some questions actually right off the bat. So if you, in a blue sky perfect scenario, what device would you want? What kind of implant would you want if you could design one yourself?
Oh, geez. So there's a couple, I would love stuff to help me overcome just genetic limitations. Like, I have terrible eyesight, like ridiculously terrible eyesight.
Yeah.
I would take robot eyes in a heartbeat. That would be
Nice.
awesome. I feel like the autonomy of being able to do whatever the hell you want to your body, you can't possibly own anything more than your physical form. So really, sky's the limit. I'd be totally interested in like a robot arm or something like that if I needed one day, or, ridiculous stuff.
Even with all the risks that would go along with that.
So I feel like there's a lot of ways to die, and became too cybernetic to handle is an okay one.
Plus, you're doing something good for the world.
Yeah,
too,
I'm totally cool with doing the alpha testing of projects like the North Star, because I believe in seeing it evolve, and I'm by trade an engineer. I get that the process is iterative. So I'm happy to volunteer because I've got health insurance. I'm reasonably genetically fine. I don't have other stuff to worry about. I might as well help move things forward with what I've been given. Right?
Yeah, interesting. So I imagine probably people have this question. So if somebody actually wants to get in on like an alpha, like you are with the star in your hand, how does one go about kind of finding those opportunities?
I would say first and foremost, just because this can kind of happen with tech spaces, be totally respectful of the history of body modification first and foremost. Like, sometimes it'll happen where people will go into a shop and be like, yeah, I want the magnetic implant because I hear cool tech stuff. But that piercing stuff is gross. Just chill. The people did all this stuff so that you could get the benefit. Maybe it'd be cool.
Right.
In terms of finding stuff, the biohack.me forums are pretty cool and fairly active. It's one of the biggest biohacking places to congregate in, and people are always talking about their projects there. So, and another thing is to just get involved yourself. Contribute some code if you're an electrical engineer. Look at people's schematics. Things like that. You don't even have to do anything weird to yourself. You can just contribute your knowledge to people who are totally cool with doing weird stuff themselves.
Wow. That is really interesting. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, hi. I'm curious. I know that, and I'm not a medical professional, so forgive me for anyone who is. I know there's a blood test that can determine if someone has cancer. Do you foresee any potential of having a chip in the body that could perform something like that blood test in the future to help forewarn people for things such as pancreatic cancer that's often not diagnosed until it's almost too late?
I could definitely see something like that. I mean, the gigantic honkin' board that was in Tim's arm was specifically designed to take biometric readings and upload them via Bluetooth to an Android device. And stuff like that isn't too far off. It's just, there's a lot of concerns with size and what you can put in the body, because skin can only handle so much, and then you have the issues of, how do you get it out, how do you make repairs, how do you make diagnostics while it's in there. But I mean, I'm sure there's that sort of thing will probably be better handled by actual medical professionals, and hopefully then like the open source community can work alongside them. I'd love to see less of a black box of medical technology and more of an open source spirit that can help reduce costs and keep things more widely available, rather than just, hey, hopefully you have money to afford this, and if you don't, then that sucks.
So I'm curious how do you think 3D printing and biohacking will combine in the future? Because I can see there's definite ways, but I'm curious what you think.
The 3D printing I could see if you come up with a good biocompatible thing. You'll probably still have to encase it in silicon or something else. That was one of the biggest problems with the earlier iterations of the magnets. Shannon Lerotte, who's a body modification god historian, back in I think it was 2000-ish, was experimenting with magnets, but they kept breaking and degrading because there's always a weak point in the silicon dip die. Steve Hayworth came along and revolutionized that completely so that it's like a mold injection process, so there's no weak points. So there's a lot of manufacturing limitations that come down to stuff like that when it comes to putting stuff in the body in terms of how biohacking stuff has come along. It's usually best to have something very self-contained like that. So I would guess that the 3D printing stuff would have to get a bit better and less bumpy and more easily standardized. And then there's the whole issue of sanitation, right? Can you properly sterilize this? There's so many different issues when it comes to putting anything within the body. You have to be hyper careful. So naturally 3D printing's probably not there yet, but I'm curious to see where it goes.
In fact, you were actually mentioning when we were talking in the speaker lounge earlier that you injected, was it the magnet?
No, I didn't do the magnet myself. One of the reasons the magnet works is because you put it in an incredibly nerve-sensitive area and then your nerves heal around it. So doing that yourself, you have to be way more hardcore than I am. I did install the NFC chip myself because I have some training in body modification. I've done a little bit of a piercing apprenticeship. It was still not something I recommend anybody go do. And a lot of it didn't really hurt so much as it was getting over the animal part of your brain being don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, what are you doing? Oh my God, that's your hand, idiot, don't do that. And just be I'm so not cool. I screamed the whole time they did the magnet, I am not cool or badass about this stuff at all.
How long did it take to actually get it in there? Was it pretty quick or was it a long?
The magnet or the chip?
Well, both.
The chip probably took about less than a minute, but it felt like a lifetime.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But your finger goes numb pretty quickly and stays numb until the nerves heal around it. The chip, I probably took half an hour to do it because I was just I don't know if I can keep, it's in. But long and drawn out over the course of a long period of time. It's weird. The guy who did my magnet did his himself and was it's no big deal. And I'm can you do local anesthetic? And all? I was nah, the anesthetic would be worse than just doing it. And plus people can't do that because it steeps into the territory of practicing medicine without a license in this incredibly weird and awkward gray area to line where body modification is in such a weird, legal, precarious situation. A lot of really good silicone implant artists who do under the skin things that make skin look raised have actually offered to do things make anatomically correct nipples for mastectomy patients, but they're not allowed to actually install it because it's deemed reconstructive and therefore practicing medicine without a license. So then mastectomy patients have to go to a doctor who might not have the actual cosmetic skills and the access to those implants that the implant artists do, and they just get a weird blob instead. It's such a weird...
Yeah, that's what made me wonder, where does one go to actually get this stuff done if you're not doing it yourself?
I mean, that's one of the reasons I did the chip myself. I didn't want to try and track somebody down. I went to Pure Body Arts in New York City for my magnet. Brian Decker, who is a piercer who invented the punch and taper method, if you're a body mod geek like me. If not, he's a piercer with a Wikipedia page. So he's very good at what he does. You do not want to mess around with putting anything inside your body. Some people do it. There's this amazing biohacker in the UK, I'm gonna mess up their name, Left Anam or something, does all this stuff to themselves in the kitchen without anesthetic. He's gone to the hospital a number of times.
Wow.
Just whatever, I don't care. I'm definitely not one of those people.
Take a bic to that paring knife and just, hack away.
I think they did their magnet with a razor blade or something like that.
Wow.
I'm just that I would not recommend doing that,
Yeah,
but some
no.
people do. But yeah, there's a lot of people who are highly trained. Steve Hayworth is a legend. He does the magnetic implants himself since he was the one who invented them. He does a lot of the cosmetic stuff as well. He makes all of his own stuff. He's the guy who makes these things. So if you want to look for someone and you want to go to the person, Steve Haber's your guy. Also, you'd be getting a piece of history in you. The guy is like legendary.
There's what you're essentially saying is there's a space in the market, as this is like an emerging thing for people to like become experts in this area.
But it takes a long time and a lot of respect for the craft.
Oh,
it's
I would imagine.
Not as simple as just, I'll just learn how to do this and whatever. It's like, no, body modification has a very long and very storied history, and it's good to know your stuff and not just sort of pop in and be like, hey, whatever.
Yeah, fair enough. Any other questions?
Hi, this is fascinating, to say the least. Are there any wetware technologies that currently, or maybe in the future, deal directly with interfacing with the human mind or brain?
See, you gotta start doing weird nerve stuff at that point, And I mean, even though the magnet for me is like an actual new sense, like I go to a city, I can feel subways passing under me and it freaks me out and stuff like that. That's still operating on the pre-existing nervous system. In terms of turning code into neural stuff, not only do we have to understand nerves and how that whole system works a bit better, we'd also have to understand how to translate code into human thought, which is way above my pay grade. Also, oh my God, how risky would it be to cut into the nervous system and just kind of mess around? Like that is some like cyberpunk dystopia.
Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned robot eyes. Have you seen any augmented reality applications within the cyberpunk movement? And if so, where are they headed? If not, where could you see it? What would some of the community's applications potentially be if you see it going that way?
I'm not sure. Augmented reality isn't quite my bag because anytime I get into augmented reality, I just want to make weird games with it. My experience with it was making webcams that strap to Oculus Rifts, and each person, like it's a two-player game. Everybody has a webcam on their Oculus and a Nerf gun, and player one gets player's 2 feed, and vice versa. And you try to shoot each other with Nerf guns and not barf. That's my experience with AR. In terms of what the larger community would be, in terms of the biohacking community, less the cyberpunk community, it seems like we're mostly. Like the closest we get is like wearables is usually meant to be stage 1 for testing something else. So there's a lot of people who do both, but in terms of biohacking specifically, I don't know if anybody that's doing cool AR stuff, but that could just be my own ignorance. It'd be cool though.
Yeah, it would be cool.
First off, thank you, Zoe, for coming and sharing a lot of your experiences with us.
Sorry, it's gross.
No, it's cool. Could you share a little bit, how'd you get involved, it's 2 parts, how'd you get involved with, I think it was OpenAPS?
OpenAPS, yeah.
Yeah, and it really just blew my mind when I started thinking about it, because then you're talking about opening up medical industry, which is a very closed, regulated, big brother type industry, to the whole world, if we could all open up treatment for medical problems. What have you thought about this? I mean, because to me, it's a whole new world, if you think about it.
I first learned about it when a friend of mine showed me his insulin pump and started telling me about this and being like, did you know I don't have access to the data? Like, this is my own body, and legally, they don't give me any information about it. Sometimes the machine just does something and I don't know what's wrong, and I can't find out until I call the company. And that just seemed profoundly wrong to me. That it's your body. Again, I fully believe there's nothing more fundamental in this life that you can own other than your own flesh and blood. So I'm not fully involved with OpenAPS other than trying to spread the word as much as possible because I really believe in what they're doing, so I'm more of a fangirl than anything. But yeah, it was through talking with an open source programmer and type 1 diabetes sufferer, and it opens a whole lot of questions, like how much of the medical tech side of things that has data like this on our bodies and is using data like this on our bodies isn't telling us, and why? Because open source stuff can evolve way faster and go through, just jump a lot of this. And I mean, obviously the answer to the question is capitalism, but it still would make a lot of people's lives better. Like I know the OpenAPS projects talked about making actual way cheaper insulin pumps that bypass a lot of the bureaucratic cost, and then trying to get them to kids who need them. And it's like, how can you not believe in that? How can you not want to help promote that and spread the word as much as possible?
So I think the cutting and the piercing has some of us a little bit squirmish. Well, some of us, not all of us. I'm thinking for the squares, the way that you usually augment your body is through your teeth. You get them replaced, you get braces, all that kind of stuff. It would be a cool place for a smart tooth that could sense what you're eating, that kind of thing.
A Bluetooth?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, I warned y'all with the dad jokes.
I was just wondering if you had any experience in that yet, or if that's I know that involves dentistry, which is another highly regulated industry, so.
Yeah, and so I've also read up on some people who've tried transdermal things like this little implant on my face. There's a lot more complicated issues when you're making anything that would protrude from the body permanently, partially and partially out. I don't know how that applies to dentistry, but I mean, I've had the same thought. Honestly, if I could swap out all my teeth with something that did something useful and didn't just have to be maintained and replaced eventually, I would be so down. Actually, that was almost going to be my answer instead of the robotic guys. Just be like, no, swap these out, give me USB things, and I don't care. Like, just pop the cap off your teeth and be like, yeah, I have storage now.
Yeah.
Like, that would be cool. I'm not doing anything with them. And making them easily replaceable, cool. Now I don't have to worry so much about candy and shit. But yeah, I think that would be a really cool opportunity. But I don't know if, like the thing is, the biohacking movement's still fairly small. But it'd be really cool to see like a dentist come in and do like LED dentures and like strobe mouths where you just open your mouth like that horror movie and the light pours out. I would do that in a heartbeat.
Totally.
I'm sorry for the gross squeamish stuff. Don't read my blog.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so I had a quick question about security as far as these devices go. I know there's been some concerns, especially with the with some of the implanted devices with security, as far as somebody maybe gaining access to it that wasn't a doctor trying to, update your prescription or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering what the general conversation is inside of the body modification community about security. Are they just kind of not worrying about it because it's all alpha and beta for now, or what's really focus there?
Some people are worried about it, but it's still really an early conversation, and a lot of it's just getting around the basic hurdles of can we even make this thing in the first place. But a lot of people who are in the open source movement have pretty strong InfoSec game. I know that my friend has written an app specifically to try to hack my hand. But that one's easily avoidable because it's only accessible like on it. I think I would notice. So with stuff like that, more what you have to look out for is social engineering. Because he's like, oh, well, I was just tell you that there's a cool photo. I'm like, why would I look at a photo like this on my hand, dude? He's like, nah, I could totally get you to do it. I'm like, okay. So stuff like that is kind of a concern. But I mean, social engineering is always the big one that you can't fully control for. So yeah, I know some people are thinking about it. People are just InfoSec minded in general. But it's still a really early conversation.
All right, well, thanks, everybody.